Well, hi, everybody. We are in Romans chapter 13, verses 1 through 7 today in our devotions, and this is a really tough scripture to apply. So let's just dive right in, okay? I think it's going to be challenging for all of us. Paul writes in Romans 13, everyone must submit to governing authorities. And I think when Paul wrote this, he meant everyone. Like, I don't think he's just talking about Christians here. I think he's talking about in a society that works. Everyone needs to there needs to be some level of submission to governing authorities. For all authority comes from God. So this is a very unique kind of Christian perspective, is that we submit to governing authorities as Christ followers because we recognize that God puts people in and takes people out. And it's almost like a sign of trust, our submission to governing authorities. For all authority comes from God, and those in positions of authority have been placed there by God. So anyone who rebels against authority is rebelling against what God has instituted, and they will be punished. For the authorities do not strike fear in people who are doing right, but in those who are doing wrong. Would you like to live without fear of the authorities? Do what's right, and they will honor you. The authorities are God's servants. That's interesting, right? That Paul actually sees the authorities, government authorities, as servants of God doing his work. Maybe not in the way God would do it, but because he sets them in authority, Paul sees it this way. Very interesting. That are sent for your good. But if you are doing wrong, of course you should be afraid, for they have the power to punish you. They are God's servants, sent for the very purpose of punishing those who do what is wrong. So you must submit to them, not only to avoid punishment, but also to keep a clear conscience. Pay your taxes too, he says. And he's touching on everything. For these same reasons, for government workers need to be paid. They are serving God in what they do. Give to everyone what you owe them. Pay your taxes and government fees to those who collect them, and give respect and honor to those who are in authority. Well, it's really interesting how Christians have used this passage to justify a couple of things. One, some Christians use this passage to say, well, Paul didn't mean, like, if there's an authoritarian regime and that we don't have to submit to them. But actually, it doesn't say that. Paul was in the Roman Empire, say empire. I mean, Nero was the emperor, and Paul is writing these probably from prison. I mean, it's a very interesting. We've got to deal with this, and so, but at the same time, I mean, how do we apply this scripture? Because we do come from, in a nation like America, we actually were formed out of rebelling against a tyrannical regime in the United Kingdom. I mean, that's actually how we were formed, and so we have this innate discomfort with anything that looks like government control, and so, like, Paul, this flies in the face of that in some ways. And so, like, how do we? So I want to challenge. I want to challenge you to think more deeply about how you respond to government, whether you agree with them or not, but especially if you don't agree with them. How should you, as a Christ follower? Now, listen, as an American, we have certain rights. We get to vote. We get to be active in the political process. It's wonderful, and I would encourage us to do that. But as Christ followers, there is another response that we need to also engage in when it comes to how we submit to authority. And, you know, I've heard some Christians say, you know, if things keep going the way they are, we're going to have to, like, carry arms. You know, we're going to actually have to have weapons to fight back the tyrannical ruler of whomever. And that's dangerous. That's nowhere in the Bible. That's something that might be very American kind of thinking, but it's definitely not Christian. And so we have to think more deeply about this. And as I was thinking about this, and I was just reminded of Martin Luther King Jr. And I've done quite a bit of study on his life and leadership, and how he talks about peaceful civil disobedience. And I loved how he talked about how to disobey authorities in a peaceful way as a refusal to cooperate with an evil system. In a sense, he was saying, I'm not going to fight evil with evil. I'm not going to take up arms against government, because, listen, it's just not the way of Jesus. As I did some research on Martin Luther King, he had kind of 6 key principles of nonviolence. And I'm going to read these. I actually think it's really interesting to kind of add to the conversation. First, here's the first principle. One can resist evil without resorting to violence. Second principle, that nonviolence seeks to win the friendship and understanding of the opponent, not to humiliate him. Third, evil itself, not the people committing evil acts, should be opposed. Fourth, those committed to nonviolence must be willing to suffer without retaliation, as suffering itself can be redemptive. Fifth, nonviolent resistance avoids external physical violence and internal violence of spirit as well. And then the last one is that the nonviolent resistor must have a deep faith in the future, stemming from the conviction that the universe is on the side of justice. And I would go beyond that, just the universe is on the side of justice, but that our God is on the side of justice. And one day he will win. He will be our ruler over all. And we can't wait for that day. But while we wait for that day, let us think more deeply about how we submit to the authorities that govern over us, even and especially when we disagree with them. God bless you guys. Have a great day.